It is the anatomy of a collapse. And look, the Tigers will have played another game by the time that this is uploaded, so it's not out of the realm of possibility. They are kind of playing for something still in the division, but they blew the lead. I mean, I don't think I'm out of pocket for doing a show about, trying to figure out what's happened to this ball club, and nobody else I'd rather talk to in this particular situation than Cody Stavehagen of The Athletic, friend of the program. We've had him on before. He'll be joining us from Cleveland, where he's currently covering the Tigers, as we try to break down and dissect the train wreck that we've seen here in the second half of the season. And I don't want to spend a ton more time on it, to be honest with you. So before we jump into the interview, just a few show notes to get out of the way. At Castellani 2014 on Twitter. We're on TikTok. We are approaching 10,000 followers, which is really, really exciting. Now, it took me having a mental breakdown due to my baseball team for this to happen, but it's exciting nonetheless. If you like this podcast on YouTube, hit that like button, hit that subscribe button. You can find us in audio form on Apple Podcasts. You can find us in audio form on Spotify. And, of course, you can find all of our content at CastellaniContent.com. That's getting updated every single day with the content that Austin and I create. I'm going to try to find the enthusiasm. And don't get me wrong, I'm very excited to be talking to Cody. Cody does a wonderful job, and I 99% of the time enjoy talking Tigers. This is one of those I have to do this episodes. And it's why I'm very glad to do an interview show. I'll say this is one thing, but I can only drain myself of so much life force talking about this team on my own. There's a lot of questions that I have that I need answered, and Cody should be able to provide that. So let's jump right into our interview with Cody Stavehagen. Cody Stavehagen joining us live from Cleveland amidst the eye of the hurricane, eye of the storm, so to speak, as we experience the current collapse disaster that is the Detroit Tigers, who, look, I mean, mathematically things are not over, but it is fair to say they've blown the lead. They're back even with Cleveland. Any fears or nightmares that we may have had have been completely realized. I'm going to start with the most open-ended question that I could possibly ask you, and I think it's the question that has been on the minds of every Tiger fan and media member over the last few weeks or months. Cody, what the hell's happened to this baseball team?
Yeah, I've been asked that like a million times in the past week, and I still don't there's just not a concise answer, because it's everything. Everything that can go wrong has gone wrong. They are not pitching well. They are not hitting well. They haven't necessarily played a great fundamental brand of baseball. A lot of the small things that have helped this team have success, running the bases, that hasn't been there, largely because guys haven't been on base very much, or if they have been on base, guys are getting stranded in scoring position. The at-bats have been bad. They're up to, I think, the 5th highest strikeout rate in baseball, which is not where you want to be, especially if your ethos is to dominate the strike zone. We know what it can look like when anyone other than Tarik Skubal is pitching. We're seeing this bullpen not just regress after a pretty good August, but seeing some real flaws in the construction of this bullpen and the cycling in and out they've tried to do. It's left you in a bad spot here at the most important time of the year. So that's somewhat of a synopsis. Everyone wants to know, well, is the culture good? I'm not sure. I don't think it's bad. I don't think guys are flipping tables or punching walls, but maybe they should at this point, because the whole try to keep it steady thing isn't helping them snap out of this. So yeah, that's kind of an overview of where we're at.
Yeah, and that was going to be my next question, because last year when I had you on, it was after they'd gone on their run. It was in the offseason. And the question that I asked you and pretty much every other media member I could talk to is if they felt like there was a switch that had flipped at some point during last season. And the general response was, No, this team was always going about things in a relatively professional manner. They always kind of kept their head down, so to speak, and prepared for the next game. And it worked a season ago. And I'm going to just ask the same thing here because I don't know what goes on in the clubhouse. I can only go off the eye test and what I see. It looks to me offensively like a team that's been pressing over the last few weeks, that has had guys chase more than we've seen them chase, weaker at bats. I mean, watch Kerry Carpenter's at bats last night. I think you get a pretty good idea of kind of what you're looking for. Do you feel like there's been tumult or pressing within the clubhouse, or have you not noticed much of a change since they started to kind of trend downward?
Yeah, I think there's pressing. I mean, I think that's the one thing that you can pick up on. Like, it's quiet, it's tense, and it's kind of progressively gotten a little more quiet, a little more tense every day in this slide. Like I said, I don't know. Does that mean it's a bad environment? I'm not sure. I think pressing is a perfect word. Like, there's obvious, of course they're pressing. They can't win a baseball game. And you're right. There's been such a disillusion of their plate approach. It's been kind of strange to watch. I said this on my pod, but one thing that really impressed me early in the season, it seemed like every night you could kind of detect some sort of plan, something the Tigers must have talked about in their hitters meetings that they were bringing into the game as a unit. I mean, every hitter is going to have a little bit of a different plan, but you could usually by the third or fourth inning kind of discern, like, okay, they're jumping on fastballs. Okay, they're not. They're laying off sliders. Okay, they're taking first pitch no matter what. There was kind of something collectively they were doing, and you could see them identify and take this plan into the game and execute. And I hadn't seen a Tigers team do that, except toward the tail end of last year, because I've covered some bad teams and bad offenses. Well, here we are in September, and you're not seeing anything like that anymore. If there's a collective approach, it seems to be to chase and whiff at breaking balls, which I don't think is the plan they're going over in the hitters meeting. So I don't know, that's got to be somewhat mental, because it's gotten really bad.
Yeah. And I do want to go back to the offense. I mean, it's like a fucking Kubrick film now, where the complexity of this breakdown is so vast that there's so many different angles that you can kind of attack it at. But sure. I do think amongst the fan base, and I think amongst the media to a certain extent as well, everyone's looking for a scapegoat. And I think in a lot of ways, not to say it's unfair, but as you mentioned already, it's a little bit of everything. At the same time, I think many people point a lot of direct fingers to what they did or didn't do with the deadline. And this is going to be my editorializing. I would say the level of hubris kind of shown by the front office in this belief of things are going to be okay. We don't need to trade key pieces in the farm system. And not only that, we don't need to acquire guys that people are think highly of, because we can fix anybody. We can take on these projects. Before we kind of jump ahead into, kind of the blame game of it all, what was your initial reaction to the deadline? Obviously you go out, you add Finnegan, you get, these scrappy pieces and Seawald, you add the two pitchers. Were you surprised by what came of it, or was it kind of par for the course based on what you expected?
Yeah, I certainly wasn't surprised. I knew enough to know that was going to be their approach. I was skeptical of the approach when the deadline came and went. I didn't think it was a very good trade deadline. But I understood why they were doing it that way. I think the easiest way to explain the why is go look at the New York Mets. They traded for Ryan Helsley, a guy I would have wanted for the Tigers. They traded for Gregory Soto, Rogers, Cedric Mullins, and pretty much those players have not performed at all. And they gave up prospect capital to get those players, especially when we're talking relievers. I think the Tigers viewed it as like, all right, this is a volatile 2-month sample. We don't really know, and they had some conversations for Helsley and for Bednar that I guess didn't go anywhere. They didn't get a deal done. And it seemed like they were just as happy getting 5 guys, throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and hoping, a couple of them pitch well, because you're dealing with volatile players in a small sample. So I got that. I still don't think they did enough. Like, I would still argue, like, when it's really in crunch time, I would still lean on just getting good baseball players to add to your team. Even if a guy has a bad August, like, all right, ninth inning, you don't have a lefty available, Stephen Kwan's at the plate. You want Kyle Finnegan or you want Ryan Helsley? Like, I don't know. That's a real question. I think I know which way I would lean. So that was kind of my reaction. I was glad they got someone for the rotation because that hadn't been talked about. I was one of few people really saying you can't neglect this rotation. You need to add starting pitching, and that was before the Reese Olson injury. I didn't think Chris Paddock was a very good get. I didn't understand why they would get a 41-year-old who had almost a 6 ERA. I knew Morton had been pitching a little better, but that just seemed very dangerous to me. So I was glad they did something, but I liked the idea of a Merrill Kelly or, someone at least a tier higher. All of that would have required giving up something more than they gave up. But that was kind of how I felt about it.
It would have required something more, but Merrill Kelly, I believe, is in a contract year. I think that there's this weird thing that exists within this organization, this all or nothing thing of it's either we're trading Briseño, Clark, and McGonigal, or we're going to make moves and basically acquire nothing. Like, I do think that there's a middle ground. And a year ago at this time, we were lauding the coaching staff and the pitching staff as a whole for the fact that it was the entire bullpen and 80% of the rotation was made up of projects. It was made up of guys that, okay, let's take a flyer out on this guy. Let's call up this guy. And it was all working. Would you argue that this year, and you could, maybe it's a small sample size, the organization was kind of a victim of their own success in the sense that they've truly started to believe that we can take on anybody? Yes, Chris Paddock hasn't been good since his rookie season. Yes, Charlie Morton's 41 years old, but we fix guys. Do you feel like in a lot of ways that major positive from a year ago ultimately kind of turned into a negative?
Yeah, Chris, I think you might be spot on there. And you used the word hubris earlier. I'm not the one using that word, but that's what I've heard from scouts, from other executives, from people in baseball across the league have viewed this front office and Scott Harris as taking on this kind of level of hubris. And so I think your point is important because oddly enough, they didn't have a very good trade deadline, but I think the criticism of the trade deadline has almost been a little bit outsized or disproportionate. It's like this one thing ruined their season because Scott Harris didn't get Eugenio Suarez, who has a 600 OPS since he's been with the Mariners. That's not why they're having a bad season. They're having this collapse in part because they had a lot of holes in this roster. They had a lot of things that did not work out this year. Even in free agency, you didn't get the Bregman deal done. You didn't go after anyone else like a Ha-Sung Kim. You signed Alex Cobb. You signed John Brebbia. Those deals did not work. The Jack Flaherty deal hasn't been as good as you thought it was going to be. You had a lot of misses. Tommy Kahnle looked like a good signing, and now the end of year grade on that is I'm not even sure. And then the waivers, the small things that this organization has prided itself on and done well for the first 2 years of Scott Harris's tenure. They haven't really had any victories in that regard. They've brought in a lot of guys. They haven't had notable success with any of them. Chase Lee, they traded for, looked good for a month. Dietrich Inns looked good for like 1.5 outings. But they just and I don't know, now he's been pretty good since he left the Tigers. There's been a lot of things that just haven't worked out. They haven't hit on any of these pitchers. They had some guys playing above their heads in the first half. There wasn't a lot of organizational depth. That's why Trey Sweeney's playing so much down the stretch right now. Their depth has been tested. Obviously, injuries are unfortunate, but everyone else deals with injuries too. Yeah, that and then just some strange roster management. Why has Brendan Hanafy been optioned 3 times? Losing PJ Poulin, who's been a nice lefty, so you could make room for Chris Paddock on the roster. Some other little things like that have really added up. It left you in a spot at the deadline where you had to do more. You didn't take advantage of it. No.
Yeah, I mean, I agree, and Mir pretty much everything you said there. Going back to the pitching moves, really, even though it wasn't this offseason, there was also this expectation coming into the year. Let's see what we can get in that second year from Kenta Maeda. He doesn't make it through April. So, I mean, that's a disaster. That's a disastrous signing. The Jack signing is the one I will defend, simply because, one, I think the pitchability still very clearly exists with Jack Flaherty. I think that sometimes it's self-inflicted and inability to find the zone, but we've seen him be brilliant at points. That's what makes him so frustrating. I also I'm going to give a signing like that more leeway because they were going for it. Like, I appreciate the move. I appreciate the idea of, like, hey, this guy was brilliant for us last year. Let's bolster the rotation. I do think, and I don't want to, let this organization off the hook by any means with what's happened. I think the most devastating injury maybe across Major League Baseball in the second half of the year is Reese Olson. That's your number 2 starter. That completely changes the outlook of your rotation. You don't trade for Chris Paddock if he's here. There's a million things that the dominoes that had to fall because of that injury. Again, not to let him off the hook, but they found out the news about the injury with 24 hours before the deadline. Then, they kind of, have to scatter and make a few moves. One thing that you've talked about with this, I want to talk about the bullpen for a second, because, there's been moments with the pen, and obviously the last week or so, even, Vest, who'd been one of the more stable pieces, had fallen apart. But something that you had talked about going back to the middle part of last season, before we even knew this team was going to be fighting for a playoff spot, is this bullpen's seeming allergy to high velo and high swing and miss. And that this is something that, even when they were successful a year ago and this season at points, is something that they just haven't really had. It's a lot of pitch for contact guys. It's a lot of, low 90s fastballs, mid 90s fastballs, what have you. Not a lot of high octane, not a lot of swing and miss. This has existed for a while now, like quite a while. And my question to you is this something that they plan on addressing either at the big league level or at the minor league level? I guess, to rephrase it, is it something that they're as concerned about as we are?
It's a great question.
Yeah.
I think they better be concerned about it. I think there's clearly been a philosophical shift. Something kind of dawned on me a few days ago. I remember in 2021 or 22 writing, like, are the Tigers building the next Rays bullpen?
Yeah.
A few years ago, the Rays just had nasty bullpen. All these guys came out. They all threw 100. So it wasn't that long ago. The Tigers had Gregory Soto, Jose Cisnero, Alex Lang, Jason Foley, a couple other guys. They were building this bullpen of kind of disjointed pieces, but they all had high velo. They all had the capability to get swing and miss. The strike throwing wasn't always great, but on some nights it could look kind of nasty. A young Will Vest. Some nights it could look kind of nasty. And here we are 4 years later, and the stuff in the bullpen is worse. Yeah. Like, that doesn't even make sense. But looking at what they did last year, clearly they were prioritizing sinkers and kind of outlier traits. I'm going to assume that's based on pitch models. Basically, they're saying, this guy throws this sinker from this arm slot with this spin rate. We can project that it's actually going to have a lower than normal batting average on balls in play. I think there's a lot to that, and that's why they've acquired some of the guys they've acquired. But that still means ball in play. That still means volatility. You wonder how much of their affinity for changeups and sinkers is trying to, like, beat the market. Do they think they're ahead of something there? Is it just cheaper and easier to acquire those guys? And if so, is this, is this a problem in that regard? Because in terms of velo, that's something you have to pay for in the trade market and free agency. Don't want to claim to have done a deep dive on every single pitcher they've drafted, but yeah, you look at the higher levels of the system right now, and there's not a lot of high-end stuff from your draft classes that has progressed up there. So it seems like there's been a change in philosophy. I'm not sure that's been a good change in philosophy.
Yeah, and I think I'm really glad you brought up kind of that the pen that they had several years ago. I mean, 3 years ago they had a 66-win team that still had, I think, a top 10 bullpen ERA in the sport. Like, it was legitimately impressive, like kind of what Fett was able to cobble together. This is part of my theory, and you bring up the philosophy, and I think you probably know more about it than I do. You do, but this organization under Chris Fetter's tutelage, they prioritize strike throwing so much, and I think that they had back-to-back high velo, high swing and miss closers, and Gregory Soto and Alex Lang that I think drove them nuts with the high walk rate and the wild pitches, and even Soto, for as hard as he threw, would struggle with swing and miss simply because he wouldn't put the ball in the zone. I think that they prioritize strike throwing so much that there's been this sacrifice of velo. Now, I don't want to cut him even more slack. I would say that two guys who maybe don't have a ton of swing and miss, but at the very least have velo. One missed the whole season basically and didn't make the team in Jason Foley, who I do still think is going to be a piece here. And then the other one that had a Linsanity run last year and fell out, it was Bo Brisky. I mean, who was brilliant down the stretch for this team. And honestly, like, coming into the year, I knew people who said this guy's going to lead the team in saves. I mean, he was throwing 100 in the playoffs. So. Yeah. He was throwing 100 in the playoffs last year. Completely stopped commanding the ball. And you've seen it a million times. Bullpens are just fragile. This is just unfortunately, in a lot of ways, how this works. I do think the lack of high velo or swing and miss is a organizational thing that is a bit of a problem. But yeah, no, I mean, they're going to have to kind of move forward. Ultimately, I've had people clamor for it, but I think it's a big reason why Troy Melton stayed in the pen. At least you got something there. You got a guy who can command the ball. You got a guy who throws hard. You kind of need that super long relief role. But yeah, I mean, I could be talking about it all
Chris,
day.
Another thing I'm always pointing out, like, there can be a cost to the chaos. You look at 4 of the 5 guys the Tigers used the most down the stretch last year. Brisky, Gunther, Foley. There's another one in there. Will Vest is the only one.
Tyler Holton.
Yeah, I guess Holton's healthy as well, but he hasn't quite been the same. Will Vest has been healthy. His stuff might be falling off a cliff right now, though. The Tigers have used their bullpen more than anyone in baseball since the start of last August. And look, I'm glad my job is not to keep pitchers healthy for a living, because no one has the answer to that. But when you use your bullpen at the rate the Tigers do, you're going to blow out arms, perhaps at a higher than normal rate. I think we've seen that happen. I worry that could be happening again. Melton's been awesome. Tigers are using him in different roles. They're using him a lot. They're using him in leverage. They're probably going to try to stretch him back out. Like you got to hope he's able to hold up. You got to hope Will Vest is able to hold up. That can be a tough ask, but sometimes that's what you're asking for when you're using your bullpen more than anyone in the league.
Yeah, and I mean, Melton I like a lot, and I don't want to speak it into existence, but yeah, we know how these things go. I mean, we saw with Job, and it's not a knock on him. It's more a knock on the era that we play in, quite frankly. Yeah. I mean, his stuff is nasty. I do still think he'll be a piece, but we've seen this movie play out. I wanted, real quick, because we're talking about the pitching, I want to just go back to the deadline again for a second, because there's this thing with this fan base is a very sentimental fan base, and I understand that I'm part of that, and I have had visions for years, this idea of Verlander either finishing his career or playing one final season in Detroit, and so much of that was sentimentally based because I just wanted to see it, but it felt like the stars aligned and the opportunity kind of arose at the deadline this year with him. He wasn't being put on waivers, but the Giants did not qualify for the playoffs. They, at the time, were selling more than they were buying. Now what's happened is Verlander's been kind of brilliant over the last few months, or at the very least, I mean, better than Chris Paddock and Charlie Morton. I'll editorialize. I don't want to speak for anybody. I get the impression whenever someone from the past is brought up as a possible piece of this organization currently as a potential fill-in in 2025, I get the impression they turn their nose up at it very quickly. And maybe it's just me looking too far into things, but do you get the impression that this current regime is kind of adverse to the idea of having to go back to the well, of having to kind of, bring back pieces that maybe, well, past their prime could contribute even though they played here for a long time?
If I had to guess, I don't think it has anything to do with the past or not wanting to bring back former Tigers. Like, I think they're still evaluating it as like, is this a good baseball decision for
Yeah.
us? I think in the context of Verlander, I remember thinking this in spring training. This was a young team. The vibes were so good. They were going to have a good season, and just being like, this whole aura, this whole atmosphere would be different if Justin Verlander were in this room right now.
I know.
It's not even to say like a bad thing about Verlander, but he's a big personality. He's a Hall of Famer. It was like that when Mickey was on the team. It just kind of is this shadow and this presence that everyone else feels a little bit. I'm not sure Verlander would have been a great fit from a chemistry standpoint at the start of this season. And I think that's probably why they didn't pursue him. Now, at the trade deadline, that is a different conversation. I still wasn't banging the table for Verlander, much because of what I just said about Charlie Morton, like a 41-year-old with a ERA over, whatever it was at the time. Like, but he is still Justin Verlander. You did bring in, I don't know, Charlie Morton was old enough to be some of these guys' dads. Charlie Morton's a great guy, but was he the most natural fit? Like, I'm not sure. Chris Paddock, like, you change the chemistry of the team at the deadline. You put new personalities. That's what you do when you're trying to win. If there were a time to do it, that would have made sense. I think you could have done it at the deadline, and it wouldn't have been the profound, like, culture-changing move that it might have been had you signed Verlander in the offseason.
Yes, I would agree. And ultimately, look, I want him here if he's going to contribute. And last year, especially towards the end, pitch data really bad. I mean, didn't make the playoff roster for Houston. I felt like I said, the stars aligned at the deadline, and ultimately, like, people are going to keep banging this drum. Better than what you got, for probably would have been a similar asking price. I mean, I don't probably would have been a little bit more, but it is, something to kind of look at and think about.
The other thing, Chris,
go ahead. Yeah.
We're probably going to go through this again this coming off season. And
yes.
I think there's going to be a real argument that the Tigers have to bring in a couple legit veterans. Like, this is still a young team. And even as, guys like Riley and Torque we're not going to be able to call them young guys anymore when they're 4 years into their big league career. But a veteran presence, veteran leadership, even if it's someone like a Verlander, I don't know. I think this team's going to have to find more of it, because in times like these, when the season gets long and the schedule gets hard, I think you're seeing the lack of veteran presence a little bit too. And so maybe there's more of a case to add Verlander to the mix next time around.
It's not out of the realm of possibility. We're having literally the exact same discussions as we had last offseason about which people to bring in. If Bregman opts out and Verlander's a free agent, we're going to be having these exact same discussions, honestly. And with the way things have gone in the latter part of the season, I think there's going to be a much strong, and with the year he's had, there's going to be a stronger push to want to get Bregman here. And we'll see. I mean, I don't know.
He's a year older, Chris. You had the chance to get him, and now you're going to give him the same deal, and he's a year older, and you were probably already hesitant to go to 6 years. So I wonder if –
well, no, I
don't know. I'm more wary than I was, even though he's still the perfect guy. You should have got him this past offseason.
I agree. I'm just speaking from a fan base perspective with the way things have gone. There's going to be a greater push of, we don't care anymore. Give him the money, sign him. We can't go through what we went through a year ago. And I think that, this season, I think that this year, and especially obviously the latter part of the season, has exposed a lot more flaws than we kind of believed, this team and this organization potentially had. And I think a big thing that was brought up, we saw it against Cleveland series, we've seen it, all throughout, is the high volume of swing and miss. And I am going to ask about Riley Greene individually at some point, but Riley Greene, I think, is indicative of a kind of larger issue, which is you're currently losing this division, as of the time of this recording, to a team that is a straight up contact team, that has a low batting average, that does a lot of funky shit, that bunts, that plays small ball, and does does things that you, quite frankly, as a team, are incapable of doing. This is, I don't know if they practice bunting. I don't think that this is really, part of their, part of their overall strategy. The reason I bring all this up is that the way that I viewed, kind of a roundabout way here, the way that I viewed this whole Tarik Skubal situation is that if you feel like the window is open and you have a roster that can win, I understand a year and a half, 2 years down the road, he might be gone to another team. I've accepted that. But you got to make moves to win now with him on the roster. These guys don't grow on trees. With the flaws that have been exposed in this roster over the last several months, as much as I hate it because I worship the guy, I think you can make a much stronger argument if he's going to walk in free agency about the idea of maybe trading him for contact guys, high walk rate guys, or, however many, two top prospects, a pitcher, what have you, to bolster the young roster that you already have, and those guys can be on your team for the next 6-7 years. Do you feel like, and I don't even really want to speak it into existence, but I think we're at a point now where it's fair to have these conversations. Do you feel like the potential of a Tarik Skubal trade this offseason has increased with the way things have gone down the stretch here?
Yes.
Yeah.
I don't know that. I think it's a hard decision, and however this ends up will probably define the Scott Harris tenure.
I would agree.
But I got to tell you, assuming Scott Harris does an end of season press conference, there's going to be a lot to talk about. Everyone's going to want kind of a pound of flesh for this collapse. I'm going to have one question. Are you committed to Tarik Skubal being on the roster next season? Because if you're Scott Harris and you really don't believe in windows and you really think windows are an illusion, then why wouldn't you trade him? Then why wouldn't you get value for him? And no one wants that to happen. But if that's actually how we're operating the baseball team, and it's not just something you're saying, if you actually believe in that process, that's probably the better thing to do. That's what the Milwaukee Brewers have done and done successfully, is trade their guys with a year left. And that is painful, and that's going to upset a lot of people. And if the plan is to run it back with Skubal, then you got to put the best possible team around him. You got to admit, we kind of believe in a Skubal window. Yeah, that's how I view it.
Yeah, I agree. I also think, and you use Milwaukee as an example. I mean, in your own division, how many times did Cleveland do this? Trading high with Kluber, trading high with Bauer, trading high with, all these different guys. Kluber pitched 1 inning in Texas, and you got Emmanuel Clase in that deal. Like they've made a living off of these, selling high. The Rays have done it a million different times. Did it with Snell. Take your pick. I think it's a bit tougher with Tarik because he is, even more so than somebody like Corbin Burns was or Kluber was, right in the thick of his prime. Burns, well, still a very effective pitcher. I know he's been injured this year. Pitch data showed he was never better than he was in that 21 season, whereas with Skubal, like this is the heart of his peak, and it'd be a really tough sell. It's just, and I agree with you. It could define everything because look, I'll use this example, and it's kind of similar in terms of team control, I guess, maybe one less year. Look at what the Nationals did when they traded Juan Soto, right? Now the Nationals aren't any good, but that was a good trade. They got 3 solid pieces, including one in James Wood that I think is probably going to be a top 5 hitter in this league in the coming years. They've struggled developmentally in other areas, but if you had a haul like that, we could look back on it in 5 years and say, yeah, this was the move that defined the Harris era, with McGonigal coming up and Clark coming up. It's very frustrating. And if this team would have played at the pace that they played at in the first half, we would not be having these discussions. I think that many more flaws have started to show themselves over the last few months that have allowed me to say, maybe there's more things that you need to add. Maybe there is life beyond Tarik Skubal. And I mentioned the swing and miss. I want to bring up Riley Greene because I've had a lot of frustrations with Greene and the topsy-turviness of his consistency or lack thereof, I guess, throughout this season. Look, on July 4th, this guy was a top 10 player in the sport and was probably going to be in some consideration to get MVP votes. He had an OPS over 900. He was playing in elite left field. Now, I I think defensive value diminished a little bit solely because he was forced to play some center at points in the early part of this season due to all the injuries. But as a whole, the guy looked like a franchise player. He has regressed greatly in the second half to a point where I view this season as, well, not a poor season by any means. He's hit 35 home runs, driven over 100. On base down, OPS down, walk rate down, strikeout rate way up. I mean, I don't want to pick on the guy too much, but there's not a whole lot to there's not a whole lot to be excited about athletically at this point. Yes, plays a solid left field, but still he's never going to run particularly well. Maybe not the kind of versatile player that they expected him to be. Yeah. I think there's some, when you look at the strikeout rate, when you look at the lack of the on base being what it is, I actually think there's some legitimate concerns with Riley Greene, and I'm just curious. Are those concerns mirrored by the organization right now, or do they simply view it as the growing pains of a 24-year-old?
If I had to guess, I think those concerns are mirrored by the organization, not just in terms of, in July, everyone's saying, oh, we got to lock up Riley. You got to extend him. As far as I know, the Tigers haven't expressed any interest in doing that. One, it's still early in his career, but this is a young player who has an injury history, whose sprint speed has already fallen off a cliff. You can look at him and it kind of hurts to watch him move around. Like, I just think there have to be real concerns about how he is going to age, how his body has already transformed. He's a really good player still, but his profile as a player, I think, is different than anyone would have imagined. Suddenly he's high slug, makes some diving plays, but doesn't actually have great range, punches a lot. I don't know. It's just a different profile. And I've been a big Riley Greene, just like a fan of his talent, kind of a defender. He's been probably the single toughest player to kind of talk about and analyze this year. At the plate, I know he's getting killed for the "nobody cares about my strikeouts" quote.
Yeah.
If you can hit 35 to 40 homers, I am totally willing to live with some Ks and some punch, and it's extreme. That's not what's killing him. The chase is what's killing him. You can't be swinging at bad pitches. His walk rate's fallen from 11% to 6.9%. Chase rate, he's the bottom 25th percentile. If he were just walking 10% of the time, I'm not sure these conversations would be as heightened as they are. So it's not just end zone whiff. It's chasing. It's a bad approach, a lot of at bats. I don't know if that's a product of falling in love with the power a little bit too much and just getting overeager. I'm not sure what's caused that, but I really think that is the one thing that's led to him having a difficult year. The good news is he's already posted double-digit walk rates in his career. He's capable of it. I think you got to hope he's able to bounce back and be that guy for you next season.
You make two great points I want to address. One, I just knew when I saw that video of with the strikeout quote, I knew that thing's going to be plastered all over for a long time, anytime he struggles. And I think I totally, when watching that entire clip, and I'm sure you got this takeaway as well, totally understood what he was saying. And we had Scott Bentley on where he talked about this a little bit as well, which is his swing and his swing path exists in a way where when he makes contact, it's almost inevitable that he finds the barrel. And that's ultimately the goal of modern hitters. There's a lot of great hitters in this game that strike out all the time. Okay, Kyle Schwarber has struck out 200 plus times in the season. I'm terrified when he comes to the dish against my team. He's got 54 home runs this year, right? There's a lot of guys that K a lot. I think it's the volume of inconsistency. And as you brought up the chase, since July 2nd, I got it up right here. Now, even with 14 home runs and 25 extra base hits, this is a guy with a 273 on base percentage. I mean, that's about as bad as you can get. I mean, those are like Javi numbers from a season ago, where he was like the worst offensive player in baseball. That is more so the stuff that needs to be worked on. I'll take the high strikeout if you're adding high walk and high hard contact rate. The hard contact stuff is there, but it is noticeable, and you can't pin it all on one guy, but it's noticeable when you play Cleveland and you see two guys on their team. Quan is a completely different player, but J-Ram's a heart of the order guy that fouls off a million pitches, that doesn't strike out all the time, and that you never feel comfortable with when you're facing. And, you have these guys in the heart of your order that are very, very boom or bust. I just don't think it bodes particularly well. I asked you about Torkelson last time I was on here, and I would say, while everyone's down on everyone right now, this has been a major plus, a positive in the right direction for Spencer Torkelson this season. Healthy all year, stayed here all year. Generally speaking, I think that what he is right now is the player he's going to be. I don't think he's ever going to be even a 270 hitter. I don't think that we're ever going to get the Mark Teixeira, power hitting, really good, elite bat to ball skills first baseman. But I think that this is, I'm not going to call it best case scenario, but a solid season for Spencer Torkelson. Would you agree that what he is right now is probably what he'll stay for a heavy majority of his time here?
Yeah, I do. And I feel pretty strongly about that. Anyone who's listened to my pod knows, like, no one gets more mad at me than when I talk about Spencer Torkelson. And for some reason, it's like I have to talk about him like he is prime Mark McGwire, or I have to talk about him like he's a bust who shouldn't be in the major leagues.
Right.
And neither one of those things is remotely true. What's remotely true is he's a pretty good right-handed hitting first baseman. He's going to have 30 home run power. If he's able to take his walks and have a 330 plus OBP, that's pretty good. This guy can hit in the middle of your order. I'm encouraged that his defense has improved this year. Yeah. It's not perfect. He's still prone to just kind of some clumsiness, but he's moving better. Like, he's not a negative defender. It's not as ugly as it was a couple years ago. I think that's a huge plus in his favor. But yeah, I don't know that there's a much higher ceiling there, even though I appreciate how his approach has been steady. If you look, it's still kind of been a streaky year where he's going to always be prone to some droughts. But this is a guy you want on your team. This is a middle of the order hitter. This is a good piece to have. He's ultimately a right-handed hitting first baseman with this sort of profile that tends to be limited in value. Those guys don't always get paid a lot in free agency. It doesn't always age well. But for right now, Tork's doing a good job. He deserves a lot of credit. He's been through a lot. He deserves a lot of credit for that. But yeah, that's how I feel.
Yeah, just because someone isn't the piece doesn't mean they aren't a piece. And I think that that's ultimately the conclusion that we've come to with Spencer Torkelson. And I think that it's very fair to have the argument about how he's come along relative to expectations and whether we're disappointed in that. I just think that's what comes with the hype. People are going to judge fucking Trevor Lawrence a lot differently than they judge Brock Purdy. Like, one guy was first in the draft, one guy was last. It's the way it goes. I mean, the comp that I make, just because when I think of like just good, not great, but solid power hitting first baseman, he's closer to CJ Cron than probably,
I think it's a really good comp.
Thank you. I mean, and Cron was a good hitter. He wasn't a super high on base guy. I know he had the one monster year in Colorado, of course, who didn't, but he could hit up to 30 home runs. Torque probably has a little bit more pop. Honestly, he could probably get to that 35, 40 home run range at some point, but just never going to really have that level of consistency. But as a whole, a pretty good campaign for Spencer Torkelson. I want to talk about the shortstop position real quick, which I feel like has been, look, there's been a lot of improvements in this organization, and I can say that despite the nightmare that they're kind of going through right now. It has been legitimately a decade of this team being completely inept at the shortstop position. I'll be generous and say offensively, in reality, and I saw the numbers that you posted about Trey Sweeney defensively this year, I would argue it's both sides of the ball. It has been a mess. You tried to plug that in after the 21 season with Javi. He gave you a good month this year, and that was in center field. So, the question I have is how much let me rephrase that. I'm under the belief they're going to give Kevin McGonigal every shot to make this team out of camp next year, and I think that in an ideal world, that's what they want, because we can criticize Scott Harris all we want and the front office all we want. They see what we see. A Trey Sweeney, Javi Baez platoon is not good enough to win in this league at at shortstop. Now, I don't know if McGonigal is a long-term piece at short. Right now, he's playing the position. He's doing it fine. The bat is elite. Is that ultimately the goal or the hope that McGonigal establishes himself in spring training next year and that we don't have to worry about this platoon again? Or are we probably just going to have to run it back, at least in the early part of next season, with a Sweeney Baez platoon at short?
I don't think you can run it back. It's not good enough. It's
I agree.
untenable.
Yeah.
Now, who's played well at short? Zach McKinstry.
Yes.
The idea of a lot more McKinstry at short with a little Javi and a little McGonigal mixed in might be the way to go. We'll see if Ha-Seong Kim opts out of this deal. That's a player I like a lot. Bo Bichette is a free agent. He probably needs to move to third base.
Yes.
So I don't know what you do there. You can't run it back with what you have. McGonigal, it seems to me like the organization is less confident in him being a full-time shortstop than they were at the start of this season. He can probably play there, but is he a shortstop? Is he the shortstop? I think he's probably better suited at second or maybe even third long-term. Doesn't mean he can't do it next year, but I'm not sure that's really the plan. So I think that's what you're looking at. I didn't want to say a couple of things to feel good about. Scott Harris has built this team through the draft with middle of the diamond athletes. You have Bryce Rayner on the way. Max Clark, they know this and they target these guys. They just drafted another shortstop in Yost. I think the hope is that one day that's not going to be a massive glaring hole. And we talked about the swing and miss. The Tigers have also really prioritized bat to ball skills. Yes. Max Clark, McGonigal, Yost. There's probably a little more swing and miss in Rayner's game. But a lot of these hitters that they've used their early picks on, and even later in the draft, they've prioritized guys who make contact and who put the ball in play. And also, obviously, who do it well. I don't think they're going to draft a bunch of 280 hitters with no power. I mean, that's not what I'm saying. In the future, those are two things to feel good about. That's been a philosophical shift that I think is going to work out in a good way.
I would agree. And it's the toughest position to be in because I do, generally speaking, feel very good about the direction that they're headed in. This is a results-oriented business, and a 15.5 game lead is a 15.5 game lead, blown lead. I mean, we can talk about McGonigal all we want, but I think that what we've seen at the big league level in the second half, at least, has been frustrating. But I do agree with you. I think the ultimate goal, and I've said this from the beginning, even when they haven't succeeded, the ultimate goal of the kind of player and the kind of team Scott Harris is trying to put together here, I think, is ultimately going to work. I think it's a smart philosophy what he's had. It's been frustrating because it feels like, at least recently, the current offense at the big league level kind of goes against that philosophy. They struck out 19 times last night. But this will be the last question, and it might be the hardest question that you're going to have to answer here because I can't make heads or tails of this. But how does this end, Cody? Does this, and we're, for the people listening, we're recording right now after they have just lost the first game to Cleveland. By the time this is up, they will have played the second game. I'm not feeling confident in the division right now. They are, and thank you very much to the Houston Astros, who for the first time in a decade are kind of collapsing, in position to still make the postseason. But do you think that things reset come October? Is there hope if they slide in that we could see a return to form from the team that we saw in the first 100 games? Or is what we've seen over the last few weeks or months what's going to carry into October, assuming, of course, this team gets there?
Yeah, you're right. That's the hardest question. Yeah. I have no idea. I've said, I'm just so out of the prediction business because last year's Tigers taught me I don't know what's going to happen, and this year's Tigers have taught me I don't know anything about baseball, man. I don't know. I think it would be the most fitting thing for this crazy year if the Tigers squeak into the playoffs, go back to Cleveland to face the Guardians in the wild card round. Yeah. And maybe they'll beat them, and it'll be like, what was the point of all this? Right. We ended up in the same place anyway. We just took the most difficult route possible to get there. I don't know if that's what's going to happen, but I think that would be entirely fitting. I either kind of think it's going to be that they do that and they make a nice little playoff run, or they're just done. Yeah, they're just done.
The way that I stand on it is, and I've been consistent with this for a long time, I don't think there's any correlation between how a team's playing coming into October and how they play in October. I've seen teams 2 years ago, we had the Rangers who backed into the playoffs and won the World Series. In the same year, we had the Braves who had the best offense in the modern era, and they won one playoff game. I don't think there's really any correlation. So if they get in, I do think there's a reset. You basically have several days off. Yes, fuck it. Sure. Yeah, they can make a run. But that's basically kind of where I stand on it right now. The one thing I'm confident in, and I'm sure you can agree on this, the team we've seen in the second half, that team does not make a push or make a run in the postseason. What we would need is first half Glaber back, first half, a lot of these guys back, the first 100 games version of this team. And, we've seen it in Tiger history. We saw it in 2006. And, I don't like to revert back to something that happened 19 years ago and act like there's a correlation, but weird things can happen in October. That's the only kind of silver lining that I find in this is just you slide in, people underestimate you. Yeah, I mean, you'll have played, let's say you do play Cleveland and you'll have played Cleveland potentially up to 9 times in a 2-week span. Like at a certain point, and maybe this is blind faith on my part, the scales have to tip in your favor at some, like you can't lose all 9. Maybe
that's kind of how I felt coming into game 1 of this series.
Yeah, maybe you can. Maybe I'll dig up this take as well. But either way, man, I mean, it's been a roller coaster. I appreciate you jumping on and doing this, man, during a time of heavy tumult, obviously. But continue, obviously, people out there, we'll make sure to link to your Twitter and link to your podcast that you do as well. You've done with Foul Territory guys, which has been awesome. I've been seeing you on there as well. So appreciate it, man. And keep fighting the good fight, and we'll talk again soon.
All right. Thanks, Chris. Good talk. Good work. Thanks for having me.
Yep. All right. Well, yeah, like I said, that's me doing my civic duty for the day, spending, however long it was talking about this team and the disaster that's gone down in the second. I mean, dude, I'll be real, and I shouldn't allow it to affect me. I'm just depressed. This whole thing is just really baked my clams. It was not supposed to go this way, and I'm praying to the baseball gods that there's some greater purpose for this, that this is leading to something. We better hurry up and figure out what it is, because right now it's just pain. But wonderful time talking to Cody. Does an excellent job for The Athletic, and I appreciate all of you going out and supporting everything that he does with the Foul Territory pod as well. He does a tremendous job. So throwing all that out there, that will do it for today's show. You can follow me on Twitter at Castellani 2014. We are on TikTok, approaching 10,000, which is a very humbling thing. If you like us on YouTube, you can hit that like button. You can hit that subscribe button. We are available in audio form on Apple Podcasts. We are available in audio form on Spotify. And CastellaniContent.com, being updated every single day. So if you want to find all the pain and misery that exists, every single Tiger video from this season is on that website, man. So it's like watching a soap opera, like watching somebody slowly lose sanity. It's like the Todd Phillips Joker movie, or Taxi Driver or some shit. So yeah, we'll be back with hopefully a more optimistic episode here in the future. But this one, as good of a time as I had with Cody, this one's rough. So I will talk to you again real soon. I appreciate all of your continual support, and of course Austin, who continues to do a wonderful job behind the lens. Appreciate y'all. Talk to you again very soon. Peace and happiness.
We're all behind our baseball team. Go get 'em, Tiger. World Series bound and picking up steam.